discuss your COETAIL final project, where the goal was to redesign a unit based on what you've learned throughout the program. Can you tell us a bit about the context in which this unit was redesigned?
Sure. So for 14 weeks, I was teaching Theory of Knowledge in grade 11 as part of a 4-person team at the International School of Phnom Penh. So ISPP is an IB World School. It offers the PYP, the MYP, and the diploma to over 900 students from 50 different nationalities in the Cambodian capital. Theory of Knowledge, or TOK, is an IB diploma course that teaches students to consider knowledge issues around them and in the other academic subjects. At the center of this course is the question, how do we know that?
This is your first experience teaching at this school. How did you anticipate how this unit would impact student learning and the culture of learning at ISPP?
So there's a noticeable way that TOK is taught in many schools, I find. Knowledge issues are easy to use to generate a debate and to create controversy and a discussion around issues of right or wrong. Usually that happens after an article or a passage from a textbook or from a book or a video. So in my mind, this generates two issues that I wanted to tackle in this unit. The first is that discussions, particularly oral, real-time discussions, tend to exclude English language learners. Not only that, it also excludes lurkers, introverts, students with lower processing speeds. It really only favors one type of student. Secondly, is that a live discussion assumes you already have the knowledge required to assume a position or a stance on the debate. That the one article or video and only your perspective on that one article or video was enough. I wanted to create learning experiences that include everyone and make thinking more visible. I find this crucial in allowing everyone to see all of the perspectives, for everyone to have a voice, and for more critical thinking before forming an opinion.
The IB approaches to learning are a central piece of all IB programs that helps prepare students to drive their own learning. How did you prepare them for this in this unit?
So from the very first class, I used a few visible thinking routines from Richard's recent book, The Power of Making Thinking Visible. A few of them are new to me, like the Making Meaning routine, so it was pretty fun to give them a try and try them for the first time. So these are acclaimed because of the education research supporting improved learning when thinking is made visible. Equally valuable, I find, is the word routine. That's because it implies that if students incorporate these as learning habits, they'll be able to learn this way regardless of the instruction of the teacher. For example, if a teacher shares a resource but not a method for learning from it, there'd be nothing stopping them from working with a partner or even individually, using routines like the text rendering protocol and thinking hexagons.
How did you match the appropriate digital tools for the task?
So a lot of the main principle behind the design of this unit was from Universal Design for Learning. So UDL asks us to consider not if the student is ready for the unit, but rather if the unit is ready for the student. So many tools and digital tools that remove barriers to learning were incorporated into the design of this unit. But the one tool that I used most prominently was Edpuzzle. It allows teachers to create questions or notes embedded through a YouTube clip. The goal is to allow students to reflect and respond to questions after watching bite-sized sections of this video. I found that it helps the teacher also guide the thinking that happens when students watch something independently by pointing out details or nuance that might otherwise be missed. Importantly, it also lets students watch and respond to prompts at their own pace, and some students choose to work in pairs while others worked individually. This flexibility would not occur if I were just displaying the video from the front of the class. Another more niche feature of Edpuzzle was the ability to add audio recordings to the written prompts and questions. I know at least one student preferred that method of accessing instructions and content in my class.
Do you think you met the goals for this unit? How do you know?
I think teachers are naturally ambitious when goal setting. So I had 3 different skills that I wanted students to improve upon during this unit. So one of these goals was for them to create elevator pitches, demonstrating the structure, argument, evidence, implication when discussing a knowledge issue. This structure was only sometimes evident in their responses or after feedback in their writing, with few students engaging with the notion of an implication. However, I feel that students understand much better what constitutes an object in TOK, and as a result are better prepared for their final exhibition next month. I'm really excited to see what they come up with. I know they're better at it at this skill because students were both able to recognize the connection between TOK and the real world in the objects that I presented to them, and because many are now able to select appropriate objects independently. And lastly, I wanted to introduce routines that students could transfer to other situations and courses. It's hard to measure its success at the moment, but I suspect there is not a minimum dose administered for students to actually incorporate those into their learning habits.
If you were going to facilitate this unit again, what would you do different next time?
I think with 4 different TOK classes, it's really a missed opportunity not to engage students as a full cohort. So even with social distancing measures and even online learning, there are many ways that students could actually learn together beyond their immediate class. One of the ways would be using Flipgrid for commenting on each other's work, for example. So when teachers share a prep, it's common to hear things like, oh, you can teach however you want it. You just have to agree on common assessments and deadlines. For students in the class of a teacher that's progressive and innovative, that's great. But collaboration on experiences that involve the whole cohort can create some shared ownership and investment by the teachers. But also this emergent property creates a class that's better than any one teacher could create individually. Worst case scenario, even if someone has created something in isolation, seen it in action perhaps through co-teaching, can spark a plug of innovation in the department. I think there's also an opportunity for students to have a choice in the type of experience they get for a unit or parts of a unit, since the classes are conveniently scheduled at the same time for TOK. A student might work with a different teacher based on choice of medium for the assessment. So think of an iMovie or a Pichakuchia versus a paper or an infographic, where the teacher then incorporates the tech skills required for that task in the formative work.
Speaking of assessments, anything you might change about the way students were assessed in this unit?
I think the assessments we had were appropriate. They align with the aims of the course, and they were also great scaffolds for the parts of the course that are externally validated, like the essay and the exhibition. As a team of teachers, we standardized essays twice in this 14-week period to make sure we were awarding marks that were consistent across all classes. It's important to remember that this was a practice essay with students writing the final version to be submitted to the IB for marking in the next academic year. So the students, have to be equally proficient in recognizing strengths and weaknesses in the task. Since students use Google Docs for their writing, it would be easy to have students use the suggest feature or just add comments to the writing in order to provide each other with feedback on a draft. It also gives students a chance to see different writing styles. I wish we had spent more time on the essay to incorporate peer feedback. I understand peer feedback, however, might raise academic honesty concerns, but if this is done between the draft and the final version, the structure of the essay and the arguments are pretty much final, and the interference in this case is minor. It's also important to model what peer feedback looks like so that a STAR student is not going to just rewrite someone else's essay, but actually provide kind and specific feedback. I would not suggest this approach for the final essay, but as far as the IB is concerned, this practice essay is formative. So I'd be less concerned about the minor interference this might generate and would choose to focus on the improvement to everyone's final essay in the fall. Another tool I would have students work more closely with is HemingwayApp.com. I have had great success with students writing their extended essay and internal assessment in biology that use this platform. Its best feature, in my opinion, is that it highlights sentences based on how hard they are to read. If you aim to simplify all sentences that are labeled too hard to read, the writing tends to become more succinct and objective. Lastly, there might be an opportunity to create an assessment that's more authentic. This task was just presented as a practice for a summative that's coming in the fall. It was basically asking students to argue if history or the human sciences should be considered a science. One way to create authenticity is to give the students a real audience. Perhaps their group 3, their history and the human sciences teachers, and the group 4, biology, chemistry, physics, subject teachers, who are not their TOK teachers, could be invited to respond with an agree or disagree on each of their 2 arguments. Perhaps even craft a response by the department to some of the trends observed in the essays. Or something more fun, based on the celebrities read mean tweets format.
It must suck to be a cute little kid, only to grow up looking like a creep. Yes, Fred Savage, I'm talking about you. That's true.
Ultimately, the feedback would enrich the debate and expand students' perspectives, while illustrating to non-TOK teachers the type of work that happens in TOK class.
What have you learned in relation to the ISTA standards for educators?
As a designer of learning, start small but start is probably the biggest lesson I've learned. For example, for many years I've wanted to gamify one of my courses, and it's never really materialized because I wanted to do the whole 2-year course. If I were to get started now, I'd begin with one lesson, get some feedback, try another lesson. After a few of these cycles, I might redesign a unit and then the whole course. This mindset is important because it means you can give something a go for a while before rejecting it. Works for non-tech things as well. As a leader, it's easy to see that the best way to lead change is by example, but it's not enough to do something and then talk about it. That meeting where it sounds like you're bragging about something that went well. You have to invite people to your classroom while you're teaching, have an open door policy, share your documents and resources with an invitation to try it out.
What are some of the implications for schools that comes from the way collaboration took place in your COETAIL experience?
It was really fun working with people that are from different schools, different contexts, that work in different parts of a school than the ones that I do. And we also made it work despite time zone issues. And I think really there were 2 types of collaboration that happened. Sometimes not being able to visualize what the final product looks like, teams need more direction and to brainstorm concrete ideas almost immediately after the why of the project. In other situations, teams were more comfortable with the gray. From a tech perspective, this could come down to familiarity with digital tools and one's personal teaching philosophy on integration of technology. In other words, it's a continuum between anxiety about the unknown and embracing uncertainty. It's important to read the room, empathize before getting any of the work done. During COETAIL, it was natural for participants to be eager to experiment with new tools. So it was easier to focus on redefining the task at hand. In our school context, there can be more resistance. That's when more concrete modeling, examples, and a safety net are key. But that alone won't work. The school administration must support a culture of trial and error. It must also demand a redefinition of learning from a technology and inclusion perspective. That's not the same thing as saying there should be tech in everything. That's saying we must consider inclusion and technology all the time, and then decide if, when, and how. Learning cannot happen the same way it did when we left teachers' college, or the way it's always been, or the way you've done it at your previous school. We have to adapt our practices, and we can only do that quickly through radical collaboration.
What technology integration models did you work with during this unit? And how do you feel about TIM, SAMR, or the PCK models?
So I would love to see the technology integration model as part of a formal teacher appraisal process as well as professional development. I know, for example, that the FDR school in Lima uses them that way. Without a formal structure, I think the SAMR model is more practical, and it's the one that I focused on when redesigning this unit. Edpuzzle redefined one element of this unit that I find interesting. Redefinition, as defined in the SAMR model, is the use of tech to create a new task previously inconceivable without it. Edpuzzle allowed for me to distribute a video with reflection prompts and questions throughout the video that students could follow at their own pace. I could show the video on the big screen and pause at certain times and give students the time to respond, but this format would not allow students to work on their own pace, a big piece for me in terms of inclusion, so the task has been redefined. What I find interesting is that a digital tool, Edpuzzle, has redefined a task that was already in the digital world, in this case a YouTube video. So it's not only about changing something from analog to digital, it really is about transforming the task to become more powerful and or inclusive. Another interesting case of redefinition was the use of hexagonal thinking. This exercise is usually done with physical hexagons that students can move around in order to discuss how 2 or more concepts connect. When we moved to online learning, I created separate stacks of hexagons in a shared Google slide for each pair of students to manipulate digitally and complete the task. This redefinition occurred simply because students, now physically separated from each other, could not collaborate face-to-face. So the task was inconceivable without technology. However, if students were in the classroom working with this method, there would be no issue of separation to overcome, and tech would just be employed as a simple augmentation of the task. What I've learned here is that SAMR as a tech integration model isn't only about the features of the digital tool being used, but also about the challenges it helped overcome. In the first example, it was about pace. In the second, about being physically present in the same room.
As a final question, how do you think your COETAIL experience will impact your future practice?
I think the use of the SAMR model for redefining or transforming learning tasks is a big one. As a technophile, I've always had an intuitive approach to the use of technology, like I mentioned in my very first blog post in the course. I think now I have a more critical eye for the use of technology, and one that is more based on research. Sometimes that means removing tech. I think that sends a message that every tech tool needs a purpose, a specific challenge it's trying to address. It adds value to the tech you do keep, and I hope avoids the idea of creating problems that don't necessarily exist just to justify the use of a tool. I got a hammer, let me go looking for a nail. As a leader, I hope that also sends the message that when a tech tool is being deployed, implemented, or reinforced, that there's an underlying challenge the school is trying to address, that it isn't a fad or an initiative that's going to go away. In other words, technology isn't the goal. Fixing the problem is. The tech tool is just that, a tool, and perhaps one of the tools to accomplish that. I also learned that seeing things in practice is key to promoting change, and tech integration isn't different. It doesn't have to be a full implementation. So compare tech integration to this guy dancing in Derek Rivers' TED Talk of how to start a movement. He wasn't done dancing when the first people began to follow. The leader accepted the first followers, who play a crucial role in leadership. They show others how to follow. And as soon as momentum builds, it becomes less and less risky to join and try something new. In fact, one would stand out for not joining. The community needs to spotlight teachers doing great work and also teachers who are giving it a go. Spotlight things that fail too, to show that it's okay to crash and burn, and that we learn from those failed attempts also. It's okay to not get things right the first time around. Spotlight things that are in the early stages so that people get a chance to follow early and build momentum. The less it becomes about following a leader and the more it becomes about following an idea or a mission, the better.